The cold bit at Owen Tucker's face as he rode through the narrow mountain pass, the December wind howling like a wounded animal. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Belle, trudged steadily through the knee-deep snow, her breath forming clouds in the frigid Montana air. The year was 1887, and the winter had come early and harsh to this remote corner of the territory. Owen adjusted his worn leather gloves and pulled his scarf tighter around his neck. At 28, he had already lived several lifetimes' worth of hardship. Orphaned at 12, he'd worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, broken horses in Colorado, and even panned for gold in California before settling in this untamed stretch of Montana 3 years ago. "Just a bit further, Belle," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "We'll make it to Silver Creek before nightfall." Silver Creek was a small settlement nestled in a valley, home to perhaps 200 souls who braved the harsh winters for the promise of open land and new beginnings. Owen had established himself as a reliable ranch hand, working for the larger operations in the area, and occasionally hiring out as a guide to travelers unfamiliar with the treacherous mountain paths. As the path widened and began its descent toward the valley, Owen spotted something unusual. A horse, saddled but riderless, stood nibbling at a patch of exposed grass near a fallen log. Its reins were tangled in the underbrush. "Whoa, Belle!" Owen pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted, his boots sinking into the snow. He approached the stray horse cautiously. "Easy there," he said softly. The horse was a fine Palomino with quality tack, clearly not belonging to any of the local ranchers Owen knew. A small embroidered C decorated the saddlebag. Owen glanced around, searching for any sign of the rider. The snow had fallen heavily the previous night, covering most tracks, but there was a disturbance in the snow near the edge of the trail that caught his attention. Following the disruption, Owen moved carefully toward what appeared to be a small ravine just off the path. The snow had drifted deeply here, forming a smooth white blanket that disguised the contours of the land beneath. "Hello," he called out, his voice immediately swallowed by the vastness of the mountain. "Anybody there?" Only silence answered, but something made him continue forward. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was the slight, almost imperceptible disturbance in the otherwise pristine snow drift. Using his gloved hands, Owen began to dig into the snow where it seemed most disturbed. His heart rate quickened when his fingers struck something solid that wasn't earth or rock. Digging more frantically now, he uncovered a patch of fabric, a woman's coat, dark blue and trimmed with fur. "Good Lord," he muttered, now scooping snow away with both hands. Within moments, he had uncovered the unconscious form of a young woman. Her face was pale as the snow around her, lips tinged with blue, but a faint cloud of breath escaped her mouth. She was alive, but barely. Owen worked quickly, clearing the rest of the snow from her body. She was dressed well, better than most in these parts, in a traveling outfit that spoke of wealth and Eastern sensibilities. Her hair was a rich auburn, partially escaped from what had once been an elegant arrangement, and her features were delicate, though now marred by the cold's bite on her cheeks and nose. With gentle urgency, Owen lifted the woman from her snowy tomb. She was slight in his arms and deathly cold. He carried her back to where the horses waited, Belle standing patient and the Palomino eyeing them with curiosity. "Miss, can you hear me?" Owen tried, but there was no response from the unconscious woman. Making a quick decision, Owen mounted Belle, carefully positioning the woman in front of him where he could keep her secure with one arm while holding the reins with the other. He tied the Palomino's reins to his saddle horn. "Let's go, girl," he urged Belle. "Fast as you can." The journey down to Silver Creek seemed interminable. Owen kept the woman close, trying to share what warmth he could, all the while wondering who she was and what had brought her to this remote mountain pass alone. By the time the scattered lights of Silver Creek came into view, the short winter day was fading into dusk. Owen headed straight for Doc Fletcher's house at the edge of town, the only medical help available for 50 miles. "Doc!" Owen shouted as he arrived, maneuvering the woman carefully from the saddle. "Doc Fletcher!" The door opened, and an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose appeared, wiping his hands on a towel. "Owen Tucker." "What in tarnation?" The doctor's eyes widened as he took in the unconscious woman in Owen's arms. "Found her buried in the snow up on Widow's Pass," Owen explained quickly. "She's alive, but just barely." "Bring her in, quickly now." Doc Fletcher held the door wide, ushering them toward a small examination room at the back of his house. Owen laid the woman gently on the table as Doc Fletcher bustled around, gathering blankets and supplies. "How long was she out there, you reckon?" the doctor asked, his voice businesslike as he began removing the woman's frozen outer garments. "Can't say for sure. Found her horse wandering, still saddled. Snow fell heavy last night, so maybe since then." "It's a miracle she's alive," Doc muttered, checking her pulse and breathing. "We need to warm her slowly. Too fast could do more harm than good." Owen stepped back, allowing the doctor to work, but found himself unable to leave. There was something about this woman, something beyond the mystery of finding her half dead in the snow, that kept him rooted to the spot. "I'll need hot water, not boiling," Doc instructed, "and more blankets from that chest over there." Owen moved to help, grateful for tasks to keep his hands busy while his mind raced with questions. Who was she? What was a woman like her, clearly not from these parts, doing alone on a mountain trail in December? As they worked to slowly raise her body temperature, Doc Fletcher examined her for other injuries. "Looks like she took a fall. There's a nasty bump on her head, probably what knocked her unconscious. Lucky in a way, being unconscious might have slowed her body processes enough to keep the cold from killing her outright." Owen nodded, his eyes fixed on the woman's face. Even in this state, there was a strength to her features that impressed him. "She's got a small bag on her saddle," Owen remembered. "Might tell us who she is." "Fetch it," Doc agreed. "We'll need to notify her people." Owen reluctantly left to retrieve the saddlebag from the palomino, which he'd tied outside. When he returned, the woman was bundled in blankets, only her face visible, with heated bricks carefully placed around her body. Doc Fletcher took the bag and opened it, rifling through the contents. Let's see. Some lady's personal items, a small amount of money, and here we go." He pulled out a folded letter. "It's addressed to a Mrs. Elizabeth Carmichael in Helena," Doc read. "From Prudence Carmichael, dated 3 weeks ago." He skimmed the contents. "Seems this young lady is Prudence Carmichael, traveling from Boston to visit her aunt in Helena." "She's a long way off course," Owen observed. "Helena was a good 100 miles north of Silver Creek." "Indeed she is," Doc agreed, setting the letter aside. "Perhaps she took a wrong turn or was misled about the route." He glanced at Owen. "In any case, she's in no condition to continue her journey anytime soon. She'll need care, rest, and time to recover." Owen found himself saying, "I'll stay with her tonight, Doc." "In case she wakes and is frightened." Doc Fletcher raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Very well. I've got a birthing to attend over at the Miller farm anyway. The first baby is taking its sweet time coming." He handed Owen a small bottle. "If she wakes, give her a spoonful of this for the pain. Keep the fire stoked, and if her breathing changes or she seems worse, send for me immediately." After the doctor left, Owen settled into a chair beside the examination table. The room was warm from the crackling fire, a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside where he'd found Prudence Carmichael buried in snow. Hours passed, and Owen dozed intermittently, always waking to check on his charge. Near midnight, a small sound brought him fully alert. The woman's eyelids were fluttering and a soft moan escaped her lips. Owen leaned forward. "Miss Carmichael, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened fully then, revealing irises of startling green like spring grass after the snow melts. They were clouded with confusion and fear. "Where?" Her voice was barely audible, dry and cracked. "You're in Silver Creek, miss. I found you up on Widow's Pass, caught in the snow. I'm Owen Tucker." He reached for a cup of water, helping her take a small sip. She coughed slightly, then tried again. "Prudence," she managed. "Prudence Carmichael." "I know, miss. We found the letter in your bag. You were headed to Helena," she nodded weakly. "My aunt." Her eyes suddenly widened with alarm. "My horse. My belongings." "Your horse is fine, miss. Safe in the livery stable." "And your bag is right here." He indicated the saddlebag resting on a nearby table. Relief softened her features. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I can't remember much. There was snow, so much snow, and my horse was spooked by something." "Don't strain yourself," Owen advised gently. "You need rest. Doc Fletcher says you took a nasty fall." As if his words reminded her body of its injuries, Prudence winced, raising a hand to her head. "It hurts," she admitted. Owen reached for the medicine the doctor had left. "Doc said to give you this for the pain." After she had taken the medicine, Prudence's eyes began to grow heavy again. Before sleep reclaimed her, she looked at Owen with surprising clarity. "You saved my life, Mr. Tucker." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, feeling unaccountably flustered under her direct gaze. "No," she murmured, already drifting off. "Not anyone. Not in this wilderness." Owen watched as she fell back into sleep, her breathing more regular now, a hint of color returning to her cheeks. He settled back in his chair, pulling his coat closer around him. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves of Doc Fletcher's house, reminding Owen how close Prudence Carmichael had come to becoming another victim of Montana's merciless winter. Something stirred in his chest, a protectiveness that went beyond the basic human duty of helping someone in need. "Rest easy, Miss Carmichael," he whispered to the sleeping woman. "You're safe now." The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight glinting off the snow-covered landscape outside the doctor's window. Owen, who had managed a few hours of fitful sleep in the uncomfortable chair, was awakened by the return of Doc Fletcher. "How is our patient?" the doctor asked, hanging his coat by the door and brushing snow from his boots. "She woke briefly in the night," Owen reported, stretching to ease his stiff muscles. "Took some water and the medicine you left. Seems lucid enough, though confused about what happened." Doc nodded, moving to check on Prudence, who still slept. "That's to be expected with a head injury." The cold didn't help matters either. He examined her carefully, nodding with satisfaction at her improved color and steady breathing. "Will she be all right, Doc?" Owen asked, surprising himself with the intensity of his concern. "I believe she will, given proper care and rest," Doc Fletcher replied. "The cold didn't do lasting damage, thankfully. The bump on her head is my main concern, but if she was coherent when she woke, that's a good sign." As they spoke, Prudence began to stir again, her eyelids fluttering open. This time her gaze seemed clearer as it moved from the doctor to Owen. "Good morning, Miss Carmichael," Doc Fletcher said cheerfully. "I'm Dr. Fletcher. I understand you had quite an ordeal yesterday." Prudence attempted to sit up, wincing as she did so. Owen moved quickly to help her, arranging pillows behind her back for support. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his briefly before turning to the doctor. "Yes, I was traveling to Helena to visit my aunt. The stagecoach left me at the last outpost, and they said I could hire a guide the rest of the way, but there was none available. The innkeeper assured me the path was straightforward. She paused, a shadow crossing her face. I see now that was foolish of me to believe. Indeed, miss, these mountains are no place for solitary travelers, especially in winter, Doc Fletcher agreed, though his tone was kind rather than scolding. But what's done is done, and you're safe now, thanks to Mr. Tucker here. Prudence turned her gaze to Owen again, studying him more carefully. He was aware suddenly of his rough appearance, the stubble on his jaw, his wrinkled clothing from sleeping in the chair, the trail dust still clinging to his boots. "Mr. Tucker," she said, her voice stronger now. "I owe you my life. How can I ever repay such a debt?" Owen shuffled uncomfortably. "No debt to repay, Miss Carmichael, just glad I happened along when I did." A small smile touched her lips. "Providence, perhaps." Doc Fletcher cleared his throat. "Well, Miss Carmichael, you're going to need a place to recuperate for a few days at least. I'd offer my spare room, but with Mrs. Fletcher visiting her sister in Butt, it wouldn't be proper." "She can stay at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house," Owen suggested. "Martha Holloway's a good woman, runs a respectable place." "An excellent suggestion," Doc agreed. "I'll send word to Mrs. Holloway to prepare a room, and we should telegraph your aunt in Helena, let her know what's happened and that you're safe." Prudence nodded. "Yes, please. Aunt Elizabeth will be frantic if I don't arrive when expected." "I'll see to it," Owen offered, eager suddenly for a task that would take him outside, away from the unsettling effect of Prudence Carmichael's green eyes and gentle voice. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker," she said. "You continue to be my rescuer." Owen mumbled something about it being no trouble and excused himself, pulling on his coat and hat, before heading out into the cold morning air. The telegraph office was at the far end of Silver Creek's Main Street, such as it was a muddy thoroughfare lined with a general store, saloon, livery stable, and a handful of other businesses. Owen walked briskly, nodding to the few townsfolk already about their business. At the telegraph office, he dictated a brief message to Mrs. Elizabeth Carmichael in Helena, explaining Prudence's situation and assuring her that her niece was safe and receiving good care. After paying for the telegram, Owen paused, considering what to do next. He should head back to the Rocking M Ranch where he worked, let them know what had happened, and why he hadn't returned yesterday. But something held him back, drawing him instead toward Mrs. Holloway's boarding house to arrange for Prudence's accommodation. Martha Holloway was a widow in her 50s who ran the neatest, most respectable establishment in Silver Creek. When Owen explained the situation, she immediately bustled into action, preparing her best room and insisting on cooking a proper meal for the recovering young woman. "Poor dear, Mrs. Holloway clucked sympathetically. "All alone in this wilderness. From Boston, you say? My stars, she must feel like she's fallen off the edge of the earth." Owen couldn't argue with that assessment. To someone from a civilized eastern city, Silver Creek must seem positively primitive. After arranging everything with Mrs. Holloway, Owen returned to Doc Fletcher's to find Prudence sitting up more comfortably, sipping broth from a mug while the doctor checked her pupils. "Ah, Tucker," Doc greeted him. "Everything arranged?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Holloway's preparing a room, and I sent the telegram to Helena." "Excellent," Doc nodded approvingly. "Miss Carmichael is doing remarkably well, considering. I believe she can be moved to the boarding house this afternoon, provided she continues to improve and promises to rest." "I promise, Doctor," Prudence said, setting down her mug. "I have no desire to jeopardize my recovery with foolish activity." She turned to Owen. "Mr. Tucker, thank you again for your assistance. I fear I'm becoming quite the burden." "No burden at all, miss," Owen replied honestly. "Silver Creek doesn't see many visitors, especially not in winter. Folks here are happy to help. Nevertheless, your kindness is extraordinary." Her eyes held his for a moment longer than was strictly proper, and Owen felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire blazing in the hearth. Doc Fletcher cleared his throat again. "Well, I've other patients to see. Tucker, would you mind staying with Miss Carmichael until it's time to move her to the boarding house? Perhaps you could fetch her belongings from the livery as well." "Of course, Doc," Owen agreed, settling back into the chair he'd occupied through the night. After the doctor left, a slightly awkward silence fell between Owen and Prudence. He was acutely aware that they were alone together, something that would be considered highly improper in more civilized settings. Prudence broke the silence first. "Mr. Tucker, may I ask what brought you to that mountain pass yesterday? It seems a stroke of incredible fortune that you happened to be there." Owen explained about his work at the Rockingham Ranch and how he'd been returning from delivering a message to a neighboring ranch when he found her. "So you're a cowboy," Prudence observed, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "I suppose that's what folks back east would call me," Owen acknowledged with a slight smile. "Though around here we're just ranch hands or cowhands. And do you enjoy your work, Mr. Tucker?" The question caught him off guard. Few people had ever asked him that before. "I do," he replied after a moment's consideration. "I like working with horses, being outdoors, the freedom of it." Prudence nodded thoughtfully. "Freedom is a precious thing," she said quietly, almost to herself. Something in her tone made Owen curious. "If you don't mind my asking, Miss Carmichael, what brings you all the way from Boston to Montana Territory? Family visit seems a long journey." A shadow passed over her features briefly. "My aunt is my only remaining close relative. After my parents passed last year influenza, there was little to keep me in Boston." She hesitated. "And perhaps I too was seeking a kind of freedom." Owen wanted to ask more but sensed it might be prying. Instead, he offered, "Well, Montana Territory certainly has plenty of that. Though it comes with its fair share of hardship too, as you've discovered." A small smile touched her lips. "Indeed, though I'm finding it has unexpected kindnesses as well." Their eyes met again, and Owen felt that strange warmth return to his chest. He cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "I should fetch your belongings from the livery. Will you be all right alone for a short while?" "I'll be fine, Mr. Tucker," Prudence assured him. "I'm feeling much stronger already." Owen nodded and headed out, grateful for the bracing cold that cleared his head. What was wrong with him? He'd known this woman less than a day, and already she was occupying his thoughts in a way no one had before. At the livery stable, Owen found Prudence's Palomino well cared for by Jim Barker, the stable master. He collected her saddlebags and a small trunk that had been strapped to the horse. "Fine animal," Jim commented as Owen prepared to leave. "Quality tack too. Lady must come from money." Owen merely nodded, uncomfortable with discussing Prudence's circumstances. He'd already surmised she came from wealth. Her clothing and possessions made that clear, but it seemed irrelevant to him. Out here, a person's worth was measured by their character and abilities, not their bank account. Returning to Doc Fletcher's, Owen found Prudence standing by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered street. She had changed into a clean dress, simple by Eastern standards, perhaps, but still finer than anything the local women wore, and had arranged her auburn hair in a neat coil at the nape of her neck. The bruise on her temple was still visible, but otherwise, she looked remarkably recovered. "Miss Carmichael," Owen said, startled to find her up and about. "Should you be standing?" She turned, offering him a smile that did peculiar things to his heart rate. Dr. Fletcher returned briefly and said gentle movement would do no harm. I was curious to see this town that has offered me such hospitality. Owen set down her belongings and moved to stand beside her at the window. Not much to see, I'm afraid. Silver Creek's a small place. It has a certain charm, Prudence observed, so different from Boston. Everything there is crowded, bustling, everyone always in a hurry. She gestured to the peaceful street where a single wagon was making its unhurried way through the snow. This has a rhythm all its own. Owen had never thought of Silver Creek as having rhythm before, but looking at it through her eyes, he could see what she meant. There was a natural pace to life here, dictated by seasons and necessity rather than social engagements and business appointments. It grows on you, he admitted. I've been here 3 years now, longer than I've stayed anywhere since I was a boy. Curiosity flickered in Prudence's eyes. And before that, all over, Owen shrugged. Texas, Kansas, Colorado, wherever there was work for a man who knows horses. A true wanderer, she said softly. Like something from a dime novel, Owen chuckled. Hardly that exciting, Miss Carmichael, just a working man trying to make his way. Before she could respond, Doc Fletcher returned, carrying a small valise. Well, you're looking much improved, Miss Carmichael, he observed cheerfully. I believe we can move you to Mrs. Holloway's now. I've brought some medicines and instructions for your care. He handed the valise to Owen. Mr. Tucker, if you wouldn't mind escorting our patient. The boarding house is just 3 buildings down, but in her condition. Of course, Doc, Owen agreed readily, perhaps too readily based on the knowing look the doctor gave him. Prudence insisted on walking, though she accepted Owen's arm for support. The short journey to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house took longer than it should have, as Prudence moved slowly and stopped occasionally to catch her breath or observe something that caught her interest. Mrs. Holloway welcomed them warmly, fussing over Prudence like a mother hen and showing them to a comfortable room on the ground floor. I've prepared a hot bath for you, dear, Mrs. Holloway told Prudence. Nothing like a good soak to restore the spirits after an ordeal. And there's stew simmering for when you're ready to eat. Prudence thanked her with genuine warmth, and Owen was struck by how naturally she interacted with the older woman, showing none of the condescension one might expect from a wealthy Easterner. I'll leave you to settle in, Owen said, suddenly feeling awkward again. If you need anything. Thank you, Mr. Tucker, Prudence said softly, for everything. He nodded, placed her belongings carefully by the bed, and took his leave, tipping his hat to Mrs. Holloway on the way out. Outside, Owen stood for a moment in the cold, trying to gather his thoughts. He needed to return to the Rockingham, explain his absence, and get back to his duties. He'd done what was necessary to help a traveler in distress. His responsibility was fulfilled. So why did the thought of riding away from Silver Creek, away from Prudence Carmichael, feel so wrong, shaking off the feeling? Owen collected Belle from the livery and rode the 5 miles to the Rockingham ranch, where his employer, Gerald McAllister, listened to his explanation with understanding. You did right, Owen, McAllister said when he'd finished. Can't leave a soul to perish in the snow, especially not a lady. He paused, studying Owen's face. This Miss Carmichael, she going to be all right? Doc thinks so, Owen replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. She's staying at Mrs. Holloway's to recover before continuing to Helena. McAllister nodded. Well, we can spare you for another day or 2 if need be. Make sure the lady's situated proper before you get back to your regular duties. Owen was surprised by the offer but grateful. Thank you, sir. I'll just check on her tomorrow, make sure she has everything she needs. See that you do, McAllister said, a knowing twinkle in his eye that made Owen wonder if his interest in Prudence Carmichael was more obvious than he'd thought. That night, In his small cabin on the ranch property, Owen found sleep elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Prudence's face as he'd uncovered her from the snow, pale and still, yet somehow beautiful even in that dire moment. He remembered the weight of her in his arms as he'd carried her to safety, how fragile she'd seemed. And yet there was a strength about her that had nothing to do with physical power. The next morning, Owen rose early, completed his essential chores, and rode back to Silver Creek. He told himself he was just fulfilling his promise to check on Prudence's welfare, nothing more. At Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, he was greeted by the proprietress with a knowing smile. "She's in the parlor, Mr. Tucker. Been asking after you." Owen removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his appearance. He'd taken extra care that morning, shaving closely, putting on his cleanest shirt, even polishing his worn boots as best he could. The parlor was a cozy room at the front of the house, furnished with a mismatched assortment of chairs and tables that somehow came together in a comfortable whole. Prudence sat near the window in a pool of winter sunlight, a book open in her lap. She looked up as he entered, and her face brightened in a way that sent a jolt through Owen's chest. "Mr. Tucker," she greeted him. "How kind of you to call." "Just checking to see how you're faring, Miss Carmichael," he replied, remaining standing, hat in hand. "Mr. McAllister, my employer, wanted to be sure you were recovering well. Please sit," she invited, gesturing to a nearby chair. "And yes, I'm much improved today. Dr. Fletcher visited this morning and seems pleased with my progress." Owen sat, placing his hat on his knee. "That's good to hear. And any word from your aunt in Helena?" "Yes, a telegram arrived this morning. She was understandably worried but relieved to know I'm safe. She's arranged for a proper guide to come fetch me once Dr. Fletcher deems me fit to travel." Prudence hesitated. "Which may be several days yet." "No rush," Owen said quickly. "Better to be fully recovered before tackling the journey." A comfortable silence fell between them, less awkward than the day before. Owen noticed that the color had returned to Prudence's cheeks, and her green eyes were bright with alertness. The bruise on her temple had faded to a yellowish shadow. "Mr. Tucker," she began, then paused. "Owen, if I may." The sound of his given name on her lips sent another of those strange jolts through his chest. "Of course. I've been thinking about what happened, how close I came to." She didn't finish the thought. "When you found me, what made you stop? What made you dig in that particular spot in the snow?" Owen considered the question. "Hard to say exactly. I spotted your horse first, then noticed something wasn't right about the snow near the edge of the trail. Just a feeling, I suppose." Prudence nodded slowly. "A feeling that saved my life." She looked down at her book, then back up at him. "I heard what you said, you know." "What I said?" Owen was puzzled. "When you found me, I was drifting in and out of consciousness, but I heard voices. Someone said she's buried in snow, and then I'm sure it was your voice you said, then I'll dig till my heart stops." Owen felt heat rise to his face. He had no memory of saying those words, but in the desperation of the moment, it sounded like something he might have declared. "I don't recall exactly." "It doesn't matter," Prudence said gently. "What matters is you meant it. You would have kept digging, wouldn't you?" "Yes," Owen admitted, meeting her gaze directly. "Yes, I would have." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance and different backgrounds. Prudence was the first to look away, a delicate blush coloring her cheeks. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, changing the subject. "Mrs. Holloway says the Rockingham is one of the larger operations in the area." Grateful for the shift in conversation, Owen described his work, the vast rangeland of the Rockingham, the cattle and horses, and the rhythm of ranching life through the changing seasons. Prudence listened with genuine interest. asking perceptive questions that revealed a quick mind and genuine curiosity about this way of life, so different from her own. In turn, she told him about Boston, her childhood in a wealthy merchant family. Her education, which Owen learned with admiration, included college courses unusual for a woman, and her decision to visit her aunt in Montana following her parents' deaths. "Aunt Elizabeth is something of a black sheep in our family," Prudence explained with a small smile. "She married a fur trader 20 years ago and followed him west. My father never approved, but I always admired her spirit of adventure." "And now you're having an adventure of your own," Owen observed. "Indeed, though perhaps more adventurous than I bargained for," she laughed lightly, touching the fading bruise on her temple. They continued talking as morning turned to afternoon, discovering shared interests in books and music, despite their different upbringings. Owen found himself opening up to Prudence in a way he rarely did with anyone, sharing stories of his orphan childhood, his early struggles, and his hopes of someday having a place of his own. "Not a big spread," he clarified. "Just enough land for a decent herd, a good house. Somewhere to put down roots." "It sounds wonderful," Prudence said sincerely. "A place to belong." Owen was struck by the wistfulness in her voice. "Don't you feel that in Boston?" She hesitated. "Boston is familiar, comfortable in many ways, but after my parents died—" She trailed off, searching for words. "The society there can be stifling, everything governed by rules and expectations. I came west partly to visit Aunt Elizabeth, yes, but also to breathe." Owen understood perfectly. It was why he'd stayed in Montana Territory longer than anywhere else, the space to breathe, to be judged on his own merits rather than his background or connections. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Holloway announcing lunch. Owen rose reluctantly, aware he'd stayed much longer than he'd intended. "I should be getting back to the ranch," he said, though everything in him wanted to stay. "Will you come again tomorrow?" Prudence asked, the directness of the question suggesting she was as reluctant for their conversation to end as he was. "If you'd like," Owen replied, trying to keep his tone casual. "I would," she said simply. "Very much." The next several days fell into a pattern. Owen would complete his morning chores at the Rocking M, then ride into Silver Creek to spend a few hours with Prudence. Each day, she grew stronger. Soon, she was taking short walks around town with Owen at her side, meeting the locals who welcomed her with the typical curiosity and hospitality of a small frontier community. Word had spread about how Owen had rescued her from the snow, and the story seemed to grow more dramatic with each telling. By the end of the week, according to saloon gossip, Owen had battled a mountain lion before digging through 10 feet of snow with his bare hands to save the beautiful Eastern lady. The exaggerations embarrassed Owen, but they amused Prudence. "You're becoming quite the local legend, Mr. Tucker," she teased as they walked slowly along Silver Creek's Main Street one crisp afternoon. "Folk have little enough entertainment out here in winter," Owen shrugged. "They'll forget all about it when spring brings roundup and new faces." "And I'll be long gone by then," Prudence said, a note of something like regret in her voice. The reminder of her eventual departure struck Owen like a physical blow. In just a week, Prudence Carmichael had become a fixture in his life, a bright point he looked forward to each day. The thought of her continuing to Helena and eventually returning to Boston left a hollowness in his chest. "Your aunt's guide should be arriving soon," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Yes, within the next day or two, according to her last telegram." Prudence stopped walking, turning to face him. They stood outside the general store, partially sheltered from the wind by its overhang. "Owen, Whatever she had been about to say was interrupted by the store's door opening and Martha Holloway emerging, arms full of parcels. "Oh, Miss Carmichael, Mr. Tucker, how fortunate to run into you," Mrs. Holloway exclaimed. "Would you mind helping me carry these back to the boarding house?" The moment broken, they both moved to assist Mrs. Holloway, the words Prudence might have spoken remaining unspoken. That evening, Owen rode back to the Rockingham with a heavy heart. The time he'd spent with Prudence had awakened feelings he'd never experienced before, a connection that went beyond physical attraction or passing interest. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh, listened to his dreams without judgment, and shared her own thoughts and experiences with a candor that touched him deeply. But she was a Boston heiress, educated and refined. What future could there possibly be for a woman like her and a simple cowhand like him? The next morning, Owen was mucking out stalls in the rocking MTK stable when Gerald McAllister found him. "Rider coming in," McAllister said, "looking for you specifically." Puzzled, Owen set down his pitchfork and followed his employer outside. A man on horseback was approaching the ranch house, a stranger dressed in the practical but quality clothing of a professional guide. "Are you Owen Tucker?" the man called as he drew near. "I am," Owen confirmed, a sinking feeling in his stomach. This must be the guide Prudence's aunt had sent. "Name's Daniel Harmon," the man introduced himself, dismounting. "I've been hired by Mrs. Elizabeth Carmichael of Helena to escort her niece the rest of the way from Silver Creek." "Miss Carmichael is staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house in town," Owen said, his voice sounding stiff to his own ears. "I know," Harmon nodded. "I've already been there. That's why I'm here. The young lady asked me to bring you a message." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "Said it was important." Owen took the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. His name was written on the front in an elegant hand that he immediately recognized as Prudence's. "Thank you," he said to Harmon, who nodded and turned back to his horse. "I'll be at the Silver Creek Saloon if you have any reply," the guide said before mounting up and riding away. Owen stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of fine paper covered in Prudence's neat handwriting. "Dear Owen," the letter began. "Mr. Harmon has arrived to escort me to Helena, and we are to depart tomorrow morning. I find myself unable to leave without expressing what I could not say when we were interrupted yesterday. These past days have been among the most meaningful of my life, despite beginning with such peril. Your kindness, your conversation, your company have awakened in me feelings I did not know I was capable of experiencing. I fear I have fallen in love with you, which is both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful because love itself is a gift, terrible because our circumstances seem to make any future together impossible." Owen's heart pounded as he read on. "I do not know what you feel for me, if anything beyond kindness and perhaps friendship. If that is all, then please disregard this letter and remember me fondly as a grateful traveler whose life you saved. But if by some chance you feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, then I ask you to come to me before I leave. We can at least part having spoken honestly, even if our paths must diverge. Yours, with deepest gratitude and affection, Prudence." Owen read the letter twice more, his hands trembling slightly. She loved him. Prudence Carmichael, with her education and refinement and Eastern wealth, loved him, a simple cowhand with calloused hands and modest prospects, and he loved her. The realization struck him with perfect clarity. In just over a week, this remarkable woman had claimed his heart so completely that the thought of her leaving was unbearable. "Everything all right, Tucker?" McAllister's voice broke into his thoughts. Owen looked up, aware that he must appear shaken. "Mr. McAllister, I need to go to town." The rancher studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Take the rest of the day. And Tucker, sometimes life offers opportunities that don't come twice. Best to grab them with both hands when they do." With a grateful nod, Owen hurried to saddle Belle. The ride to Silver Creek seemed interminable, though Belle responded to his urgency with a steady, ground-eating pace. Owen's mind raced ahead, trying to formulate what he would say to Prudence when he saw her. What future could they possibly have? She belonged in civilized society, not the rough existence of a Montana ranch. And yet, her letter suggested she was willing to at least consider possibilities beyond the conventional path laid out for her. By the time he reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, Owen had come to a decision. He would be honest about his feelings and his circumstances, holding nothing back. Prudence deserved complete honesty, whatever the outcome. Mrs. Holloway greeted him at the door with a knowing smile. "She's in the garden out back," she said before he could speak. "Been watching the road all morning." The small garden behind the boarding house was dormant for winter, but a bench had been placed in a sunny spot protected from the wind by the house itself. Prudence sat there, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her face turned up to the weak December sun. She looked, Owen thought, like a painting, something too fine and beautiful for this rough frontier town. She turned at the sound of his footsteps crunching on the frozen ground, and the hope that leapt into her eyes gave him courage. "You came," she said simply, rising to her feet. "Of course I came," Owen replied, stopping a few feet from her. "How could I not after your letter?" A touch of uncertainty crossed her face. "And what did you think of what I wrote?" Owen took a deep breath. "I think you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. I think these past days have been the happiest of my life, and I think I love you too, though I have no right to." Joy bloomed across Prudence's features. "No right? What do you mean?" "Look at me, Prudence," Owen gestured to himself. "I'm a cowhand. I have some savings, plans for my own place someday, but that's years away. I have nothing to offer a woman like you." Prudence stepped closer to him, her green eyes intent on his face. "A woman like me? You mean a woman who nearly died from her own foolishness, until a brave, skilled man saved her life. A woman who has never felt so alive as she has these past days, talking with you, learning about your world. A woman who has found here, in this wild place, a freedom and honesty that all of Boston's wealth couldn't provide." She reached out, taking his calloused hands in her smaller, softer ones. "You have everything to offer me, Owen Tucker. Everything that matters." Owen's heart soared at her words, but practicality held him back. "Your life is in Boston. Your family, your society, my parents are gone," Prudence interrupted gently. "My only close family is Aunt Elizabeth, who would understand better than anyone the choice to follow one's heart. As for Boston society," she shrugged, "it holds little appeal for me now. Even before I met you, I was considering whether to return at all." "What are you saying?" Owen asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying that perhaps there is a future for us if you want it too. Not an easy one, perhaps. There would be adjustments for both of us, but possible." Owen pulled her gently closer. "I want it," he said softly. "God help me, I want it more than I've ever wanted anything." Prudence's smile was radiant. "Then we'll find a way." In that moment, all the barriers between them, background, education, wealth, seemed insignificant compared to the bond they had formed. Owen leaned down, and Prudence rose on her toes to meet him, their lips touching in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they parted, Prudence's eyes were shining. "What do we do now?" she asked. "First," Owen said, "you should still go to Helena, visit your aunt as planned. I don't want to deprive you of that time with her." Prudence nodded. "And then?" And then, if you're still sure about us, come back to Silver Creek. We'll figure out the rest together." "I'll be sure," Prudence said with certainty. "But yes, I think that's wise. Aunt Elizabeth has been looking forward to my visit, and I should explain things to her in person." They spent the rest of the day planning, talking through practicalities and dreams alike. Owen described the land he'd had his eye on, a small but promising parcel not far from Silver Creek. Prudence revealed that she had a modest inheritance from her parents, enough to perhaps accelerate his plans if they pooled their resources. "I don't want your money," Owen said immediately. "It wouldn't be my money," Prudence countered. "It would be our money, our future." Partners in all things, Owen. Put that way, it was harder to object. Still, Owen's pride struggled with the idea. "Let me think on it," he said finally. "There's time to work out these details." They agreed that Prudence would spend a month with her aunt in Helena. Then, if she was still resolved, she would return to Silver Creek. In the meantime, they would exchange letters, Owen riding into town to post his, and Prudence sending hers with the regular mail coach that connected Helena to the smaller settlements. "It will be the longest month of my life," Owen said as evening approached and they sat together in Mrs. Holloway's parlor. "For me as well," Prudence agreed. "But it will give us both time to be certain, to plan." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Owen arrived at the boarding house early to see Prudence off. Mr. Harmon had arranged for a sturdy covered wagon rather than horseback travel, equipped with warm blankets and heated bricks for the journey. Mrs. Holloway fussed over Prudence's departure, providing a basket of food and extra blankets. "You come back to us, dear," she said, embracing Prudence warmly. "We'll keep your room ready." "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Holloway," Prudence replied, returning the embrace. "I will certainly return." When it was time to leave, Owen helped Prudence into the wagon, then stood holding her hand, reluctant to let go. "1 month," he said. "1 month," she confirmed. "Not a day longer." Their parting kiss was brief but full of feeling. As the wagon pulled away, Prudence looked back, her face a mixture of joy and sadness that Owen knew mirrored his own emotions. He stayed in the street long after the wagon had disappeared from view, already counting the days until her return. The promised month stretched interminably. Owen threw himself into his work at the Rockingham, taking on extra duties and volunteering for the most challenging tasks to keep his mind occupied. In the evenings, he wrote long letters to Prudence, describing his days, his thoughts, his plans for their future. Her letters in return were a lifeline. She wrote of her aunt's initial surprise at her plans, followed by understanding and support. "Aunt Elizabeth says she recognized the look in my eyes," Prudence wrote in one letter. "She says it's the same look she had when she decided to follow Uncle James west all those years ago. She wants to meet you, of course. Perhaps in the spring, when travel is easier, we can visit Helena together." In another letter, she described her growing certainty about their future. "Each day away from Silver Creek, away from you, only confirms what I already knew. My heart has found its home, Owen. Not in Boston, not even in Helena with its relative comforts, but wherever you are." Owen read and reread her letters until they were soft at the creases, carrying them with him throughout his days like talismans. As the month neared its end, Owen approached Mr. McAllister about purchasing the parcel of land he'd been eyeing. To his surprise, the rancher offered not only to sell him the land at a fair price, but also to help him establish his own small herd. "You're one of the best hands I've ever had, Tucker," McAllister said gruffly. "Hate to lose you. But a man should have his own place, especially when he's starting a family." News of Owen's land purchase and impending marriage, though no formal proposal had yet been made, spread quickly through Silver Creek. The community's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, with offers of help to build a proper house before Prudence's return. "Can't have that Boston lady living in a tent," Jim Barker from the livery declared as he volunteered his carpentry skills. In the final days before Prudence's expected return, Owen worked from dawn until dusk alongside the volunteers from town, raising a simple but sturdy two-room cabin on his new land. It was modest compared to what Prudence must be accustomed to, but it was solid, with a proper wooden floor and a stone fireplace that would keep it warm through the Montana winters. Martha Holloway organized the women of Silver Creek to provide furnishings, curtains for the windows, a patchwork quilt for the bed, dishes and cooking utensils for the kitchen area. Even Doc Fletcher contributed, arriving one day with a small bookshelf he'd crafted himself. "For the ladies' books," he explained. "She seems the reading type." The day before Prudence was due to return, Owen stood in the completed cabin, marveling at what community effort had accomplished in such a short time. It wasn't grand, but it was their home built with care and goodwill. The next morning, Owen rode into Silver Creek earlier than necessary, too restless to stay at the ranch. He paced the main street, checking and rechecking the time, until finally the distant sound of wagon wheels announced an arrival. The mail coach rolled into town right on schedule, dust billowing behind it as it came to a stop outside the general store, which also served as the mail depot. Owen stood across the street, his heart pounding as the passengers began to disembark. And then she was there, stepping down from the coach, looking around eagerly. She wore a practical traveling outfit, her auburn hair simply arranged beneath a modest hat. To Owen, she had never looked more beautiful. "Prudence," he called, moving toward her. She turned at the sound of his voice, and her face lit up with a joy that matched the surge in his own heart. They met in the middle of the street, heedless of the curious onlookers, and for a moment simply stood looking at each other, drinking in the sight after a month apart. "You're here," Owen said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "You really came back." "I promised I would," Prudence replied softly. "Did you doubt me?" "Never," he said truthfully. "But I still can't quite believe this is real." Prudence laughed, the sound like music to his ears. "It's very real, Owen Tucker. I'm here to stay if you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Owen dropped to one knee right there in the dusty street, taking her hand in his. The gesture drew gasps and murmurs from the growing crowd of onlookers. "Prudence Carmichael," he said, looking up into her beloved face. "1 month ago, I pulled you from the snow, not knowing that in saving your life I was finding my own heart. You've brought joy and meaning to my days in a way I never thought possible. I love you, and if you'll do me the great honor of becoming my wife, I promise to cherish and protect you all the days of my life." Tears glistened in Prudence's green eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." A cheer went up from the townspeople as Owen rose to his feet and pulled Prudence into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love. Later, as Owen drove Prudence in a borrowed wagon toward their new home, he told her about the cabin and the community that had helped build it. "It's not what you're used to," he cautioned. "Simple, small, it sounds perfect," Prudence interrupted, squeezing his hand. "Because it's ours." When the cabin came into view, sitting proudly on a gentle rise overlooking a stream, Prudence's intake of breath was audible. "Oh, Owen," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Owen helped her down from the wagon and led her to the door. "Welcome home," he said, opening it for her to enter. Prudence stepped inside, turning slowly to take in every detail: the neat stone fireplace, the simple furniture, the small bookshelf already holding the few books Owen owned, the curtains fluttering at the windows, the door to the bedroom visible beyond a partial wall. "The townspeople helped," Owen explained. "Wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable." Tears welled in Prudence's eyes again. "It's more than comfortable, it's perfect." She moved to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thank you, Owen, for everything." "I should be thanking you," he countered, holding her close. "You gave up so much to be here." "I gained everything that matters," Prudence replied firmly, "and this is just the beginning." They were married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, with the entire community in attendance. Mrs. Holloway cried openly. Doc Fletcher beamed like a proud father, and even Gerald McAllister looked suspiciously misty-eyed as Owen and Prudence exchanged their vows. Prudence wore a simple white dress that Martha Holloway and the other women had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of an elaborate veil. To Owen, she outshone any society bride in her natural beauty and radiant happiness. Their wedding night in their cabin was a sweet discovery of each other, tender and passionate by turns. As they lay together afterward, the moonlight streaming through the window casting a silver glow over their entwined forms, Owen marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "When I found you in the snow that day," he murmured, stroking Prudence's hair as she rested her head on his chest, "I never imagined this." "Nor did I," she admitted, "but perhaps some part of me recognized you even then, my rescuer, my love." "I would have kept digging," Owen said softly, "until I found you or my heart gave out." "I know." Prudence raised her head to look into his eyes. "That's why I love you, Owen Tucker. That's why I always will." The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also immeasurable joy. Owen's small ranch prospered through hard work and Prudence's keen business sense. Their herd grew, and eventually they were able to hire hands of their own, becoming respected members of the community. Prudence's Aunt Elizabeth visited often, delighting in her niece's happiness, and eventually moving to Silver Creek permanently after her own husband passed away. Her experience and connections proved invaluable as the territory grew and changed. In their second year of marriage, Prudence gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor, after Owen's mother. 2 years later, a son followed, whom they called James, after Prudence's father. The cabin expanded as their family did, with Owen adding rooms and improvements each year. Prudence never regretted her choice to leave Boston behind. She found purpose in her life with Owen, not only as a wife and mother, but as an active participant in their ranching business and in the growing community. She started Silver Creek's first school, teaching not only her own children but any others who wished to learn. Sometimes, during the harsh Montana winters when snow blanketed the land, Owen would find Prudence standing at the window, a distant look in her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked her once, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About how close we came to never having this," she replied, leaning back against him. "If you hadn't found me that day, I would have found you," Owen said with certainty. "If not then, somehow, somewhere. We were meant to be, Prudence." She turned in his arms, her green eyes still as captivating as the first time he'd seen them open after pulling her from the snow. "I believe that too," she said, reaching up to touch his face, now weathered by years of working outdoors but still as beloved to her as ever. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Owen had found Prudence buried in the snow. They hosted a gathering at their ranch, no longer small, but a thriving operation that employed several hands and was known throughout the territory for its quality stock. As twilight fell and their guests departed, Owen and Prudence stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play one last game before bedtime. Eleanor, now 8, had her mother's auburn hair and quick mind. James, 6, had Owen's steady nature and love of horses. Are you happy?" Owen asked his wife. Though he knew the answer, Prudence smiled up at him, the love in her eyes undimmed by the passage of time. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible. Are you?" Owen looked at their children, their home, the life they had built together from that fateful moment in the snow. "More than words can say," he replied honestly. "Every day with you is a gift I never expected to have." "She's buried in snow," they had whispered that day, those strangers who had seen him frantically digging. And he had vowed, "Then I'll dig till my heart stops." His heart hadn't stopped. It had only begun to truly beat the moment he found her. And it would continue, strong and steady, through all the years to come, a testament to a love born in the harshest of circumstances, but destined to flourish in the fertile soil of devotion, respect, and unwavering commitment. As night fell fully over their Montana home, Owen and Prudence Tucker gathered their children and went inside, closing the door on the cold and snow, secure in the warmth of the family they had created and the love that had saved them both.